Destiny 2. As a disclaimer, though the other games I have reviewed have been more of a breakdown analysis of the games to see whether a game is worth playing or not, that will not be the case here. With Destiny, we're doing an emotional rant. Because Destiny 2? Well, Destiny 2 is personal. So to understand where I'm coming from, I must first talk about Bungie itself, instead of jumping straight into Destiny 2. So the year is 2003. I had just moved to a new school and a classmate of mine asked me if I liked video games, and I said yes, because who didn't back then? He invited me to his house, and that's the very first time that I ever saw an Xbox, the OG Xbox. A huge and heavy box with an equally huge and heavy controller that looked like an alien spaceship? Yes, that Xbox. First, he showed me Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, and as impressive as that game was for the time, and me being an RPG fanatic, I wasn't too interested in it. Perhaps noticing my lack of interest, he asked if I liked shooting aliens, and having played Half-Life 1 prior to that, I said, yeah, I like shooting aliens. And he showed me Halo Combat Evolved. And holy shiznit, my nerds, that was something else. I played a lot of shooters on my brother's computer before, from old Medal of Honor games, Battlefield 1942, Counter-Strike, Half-Life 1, but console-wise I had only played 007 GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64. And Halo was a completely different beast in comparison to any of those. For starters, Halo actually had a story that was evolving as you played, and not just something that you had to infer or read about later. And right off the bat, when you saw that ring-shaped pseudo-planet, you knew you were in for a good ride. It was as mysterious as it was cool, but perhaps, above all, was the feel of the gunplay. Aside from the huge-ass controller vibrating with every shot and the controller actually having a real trigger-like button, just the feel of the gunplay was fantastic, unlike anything I had ever seen before up until that point. It made each shot feel like it mattered, like you really were shooting a lethal machine at the pull of a trigger. Not only that, but melee, ooh, it felt powerful. And that makes sense since we were playing a genetically enhanced super soldier. And that was the very first contact I had with a game made by Bungie. Now, I can sit here and tell you about the games Bungie made before Halo, but I won't, because I wasn't here for any of it. But I can personally tell you that every Halo made by Bungie was a success. And though it wasn't single-handedly, Bungie with Halo played a huge role in making Xbox and Xbox 360 as popular as they became. Every holiday, every weekend was a time to play Halo with our friends. It shaped and changed most of the boys our age into gamers that we are today. And it wasn't a one-time off either. In Halo Combat Evolved, which launched in 2001, we were introduced to that universe as we played as Master Chief to save the humanity from the Covenant at the Flood. Every Halo fan would have been content with just more of the same. But no, Bungie kept making them better. In Halo 2, launched in 2004, though everyone's hero Master Chief was still there, doing what he does best, we were also introduced to Arbiter, and got to play in the point of view of the Covenant. Not only did it shed more light on the Covenant and what they were after, but also deepened and broadened the lore of the universe. This was an iconic entry. It was to no one's surprise that it became the highest selling title on the OG Xbox at 8 million copies sold. Then, Halo 3 came out in September 2007. New console, new specs, new entry. And by God, what a fantastic entry it was. No longer playing separately, the Master Chief and the Arbiter were now fighting side by side to save the universe. If you played co-op, Player 2 was no longer the random imaginary clone that disappeared during cutscenes. Player 2 was now the Arbiter. The stakes were higher, the graphics were prettier, and we were ready to finish the fight. It was a definitive conclusion for the Halo trilogy, and we were all here for it. It was a masterpiece, or rather, a masterpiece. I haven't even mentioned the PvP multiplayer of the Halos. With Xbox Live for the OG Xbox, Halo was one of the very first online FPS games for consoles. Yes, we did have that on PC a long time ago, but for consoles it was unprecedented, and with such magnificent gunplay like I mentioned before, it was quickly the favorite game for a lot of people on the Xbox, both competitive and casual. But shortly after Halo 3 launched, just 1 month after really, Bungie announced that they were splitting from the Microsoft, as they felt they had gotten bigger as a studio and would like to aspire to bigger projects of their own. Microsoft retained the rights to Halo, and so despite Bungie having achieved their quote-quote freedom, it came at a price of their beloved game franchise. That said, even though they were now working on their own, Microsoft still had them make more Halo games. 2 in fact. The first one was Halo 3 ODST, launched in September 2009. This one was widely seen as the unpopular Bungie Halo, mostly because it was different. Like I mentioned before, Halo 3 was a conclusion to the trilogy. So instead of messing that up, hint hint, wink wink, I'm looking at you 343, they gave us ODST, in which you played as an orbital drop shock trooper, meaning you're not Spartan, so you are not a genetically enhanced super soldier, but still, they were the best of the normie soldiers, meaning that they couldn't do the same things that Master Chief could do, which meant that you weren't going out always solo and defeating everything with no issue. There was a cast of characters around you, but the game never really let you get to know them. There wasn't really a meaningful interaction between the characters or any background story on the character that you played. Not only that, but ODST is the only Halo game without its own online competitive multiplayer/matchmaking, because technically it was still Halo 3. But despite this, it was still at a full price of $60 even if it didn't feel like a full game on its own. So of course, people didn't like that. And many people saw this as a sign that Bungie couldn't make it on their own. That said, I liked it for what it was. It showed that Master Chief wasn't the only one fighting, all the other soldiers were there too, even if they weren't superhuman like he was. Each of these soldiers went through hell and back with their own sacrifices and hardships, and I think that added to the bigger experience that was Halo. Also, even though I did say less popular, it still sold 6 million copies. Then a few months before they released Halo Reach, Bungie announced that they had signed a 10-year publishing deal with Activision in April 2010. And in September 2010, still through Microsoft, Bungie brought us Halo Reach, which was the prequel of Halo Combat Evolved. And this was, in my humble opinion, the cream of the crop. It sold less than Halo 3, but still managed to sell a whopping 9 million copies. Everything people criticized about ODST, they fixed it in Reach. You played a different Spartan, part of the team called Noble. Each member of this team had a distinct personality, and not all of them got along with each other. But in the short time that you saw them, Bungie made you feel things. It made us feel connected to this bunch of battle-hardened superhumans. They showed us the struggle humans faced in their early encounters with the Covenant, the valiant bravery they had put out, and the futility against such an alliance of several alien species with better tech. All of that was told beautifully through a campaign filled with epic and heartfelt moments. Not only that, but he had a new multiplayer with new things to play around with that changed the meta from Halo 3. And a lot of you who never played those, or only played the 343 ones, might be thinking that's a lot of titles and hence, it must have been repetitive. Or, how is that any different from Call of Duty pumping out so many games? But believe you me when I say each Halo made by Bungie was always adding to the big experience I mentioned before, the Halo experience. It wasn't just a lot of games, it was a journey that left a mark in the history of gaming, that consequently shaped how a lot of gamers from back then saw console FPS. And Reach was a culmination of all the Halos that Bungie had made thus far, and it was beautiful what they had done and achieved. With Reach, Bungie showed everyone that alone or not, they were still masters of what they did, and that there weren't many out there, if any, that could do what they did. Something that was proven right in 2012 when Halo 4 was launched, developed by 343. And don't get me wrong, Halo 4 was an okay game. I'm sure 343 did their best given the circumstances. Think about it. They were given one of the most acclaimed franchises that someone else used to make, and were told to just do it. And for what it was okay. It was still Halo with Master Chief and Cortana, but every Halo fan could instantly feel that something was off. That Bungie magic, it was gone. And we all mourned it. Some of us never even went back for Halo 5, wondering if we were ever going to play another game as great as the Bungie Halos ever again. Then September 2014, Destiny 1 came out. Most of us were hesitant, of course. After all, despite the game being made by Bungie, it was published by Activision, and also it was not just an FPS. It had MMO and RPG elements to it. But when we did play it, taking our first steps in EDZ after Ghost woke us up, we instantly knew this was it. Bungie was back with all of his magic. And this time, it was on a much larger scale. We were guardians, immortal warriors who fought all sorts of threats. We traveled all around the solar system, mastered 3 elements, and fought enemies that were larger than life. The story was a little more convoluted than the Halo one, but the lore, it was much larger and deeper than Halo ever was. That said, we could only learn about all that through reading little texts in-game, instead of actually playing through it, which wasn't terrible per se. A lot of RPGs and online games did and still do this. But unlike Halo, where you didn't have to read any of the novels to understand the games, a lot of what made this universe of Destiny tick was in the little pieces of text that you had to read on your own time. That said, it was an instant hit, selling over $325 million at retail in just the first 5 days and becoming Game Radar's 2014 Game of the Year. With an epic campaign story and an overworld you can explore, teamed with 2 of your buddies, while still being able to meet other players out there, as random public events happened throughout several planets and moons. This wasn't just another shooter game. It was much more than that, and we all felt it. But to those who wanted a competitive shooter game, there was matchmaking PvP in the form of the Crucible. But to those who only wanted to stick to PvE, they could still find some challenges in the form of strikes, which were shorter missions that were slightly more challenging than the campaign missions, or even joining up with 5 other people to take on the hardest challenge that the game had to offer back then, the Vault of Glass raid. But of course, as with most online games, people were afraid the content would run stale after a while, and that we would be bored of the game. But Bungie came in clutch with DLCs. The first one was The Dark Below, which came out just a few months after the base game. For just $19.99, it brought us 4 more story missions that continued where the main campaign had left off. A new strike, 3 more Crucible maps, new bounties, new equipment, and a whopping new raid. We were overflowing with content. Then May 2015, a second DLC hit, House of Wolves, also $19.99. It brought a new hub of sorts as a social space, bringing with it 6 new story missions, a new strike, another 3 Crucible maps, new bounties, new equipment, the ability to reforge legendary weapons to try and get better perks, and 2 new multiplayer modes. The Prison of Elders, which was a PvE arena, and the Trials of Osiris for the PvP players. I personally had a blast playing through all that with my brother back in the day. But then, September 2015, we got a bigger expansion, the Taken King, at double the price of the previous DLCs, coming out at $40 US. And despite the bigger price, this brought another PvE area, new playable missions, several new equipment, swords were introduced here, public activities, 3 new strikes, a whopping 7 new Crucible maps, 3 new PvP modes, which were Rift, Mayhem, and Zone Control, new subclasses for each of the 3 elements, and the King's Fall raid. It definitely was a lot of content, but a lot of players weren't too sure that it was enough to justify a $40 price tag. So understandably, many of us decided to hold off on the decision to purchase this. After all, we paid $40 total for the 2 previous DLCs and still had enough content to have fun with for the time being, right? No. This was the first time we started to see cracks in an otherwise perfect game and dev relationship with their players. Suddenly, those of us who had purchased the previous DLCs found ourselves locked out of the content we had access to before, all because we didn't buy the newest DLC, even though we did pay for those contents already. It felt like betrayal. The player base was torn in two, the ones that felt injustice by this, and those who ran to Bungie's defense, saying things like, it's their game, they can do whatever they want with the content, and buying a digital game content does not mean you own it. It is susceptible to change it at any time. Or even, if you don't like the game, don't play it. Don't have acid, just buy it or quit. And I know, everyone is entitled to their opinions. I know that, and I'm not saying they're wrong, I'm not saying they're right either. I just know that it felt like, let me paint you a picture of what it felt like. It felt like I had bought a couch from IKEA and thought it was great. Then a few months later, IKEA contacts me asking if I want to buy their new complimentary couch pillows for the couch that I bought. And I say, why yes, this is quite a fantastic couch. I'd very much like a complimentary pillow for it. Then a few months later, they call me again saying, you know what? We made a complimentary ottoman. It's slightly pricier, but I promise you it is great. And then I look at my couch and its couch pillows and I say, you know what? I think I'm good with this for now, but I will give it a thought for the future. And then the IKEA person goes, oh, okay. And then the next day they show up in my house and saw off 1/4 of my couch and cut 1/3 of my pillow away. And I'm like, whoa, 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 what's happening here? And they're like, this is to help you in your decision for the ottoman. And I'm like, but I paid for those. And then these random people who have nothing to do with IKEA run up to my face and they say, you don't actually own any of the furniture when you pay for them. And if you won't commit to the entire visual of the couch, then why do you have it? Don't have acid, buy the ottoman or throw the couch away. Now, does that sound ridiculous? Because that's what it felt like was happening. So it is to no surprise that many of us back then who didn't initially buy the Taken King quit Destiny altogether. Perhaps the worst part of this situation was that the players who bought it immediately didn't even realize this was an issue that others were facing. And a short time later, Bungie made a bundle with the base game and all 3 DLCs. Even a physical retail version of it was put out, so that people could just purchase the game and all of the 3 DLCs just for one price. So at this point, even new players also didn't realize that this was a thing that had happened. Only those who didn't buy Taken King immediately and didn't give in to the pressure afterwards to buy it were going through this and eventually quit without anyone really realizing what the problem was. And it hurt, of course it hurt. This was Bungie. This was our dear Bungie who had brought us Halo. But then, Bungie didn't address any of this. Those of us who quit turned away and vowed to never look back. After all, it was 2015, 2016, there were other games to be played to fill that emptiness in our hearts, right? Eventually, they launched the 4th DLC, Rise of Iron, in September 2016, and a new bundle that had all 4 DLCs and the base game. But by then I wasn't paying much attention, so I don't know if the same issue happened there, where they gatekept previous content if the 4th DLC wasn't purchased. But time passed, our hearts almost healed. We were playing other games. Did we miss Halo? Did we miss Destiny? Fluff, yeah we did! But we swore never to look back. But what is that? Destiny 2 launched in September 2017. Of course, we all watched the trailer, and of course we all got excited, and some gamers even gave in. But, fluff it, we swore, we vowed to never look back. And holy shizmanit, Activision is giving away Destiny 2 base game for free? That's right, the 3rd DLC of Destiny 2 called Forsaken, which is arguably the best DLC to have come out of any Destiny 2 content so far, came out in September 2018. But in November 2018, for about 16 days, Activision Blizzard gave away the base game of Destiny 2 for free. That turned out to be a genius move because those of us who had quit around the Taken King were swearing to ourselves that we would never spend another dollar with Bungie, and now we didn't have to. A paid $59.99 US game for free? Technically, we weren't breaking any of our promises here by claiming that bad boy and claiming the shizmanit out of it. And boy, did it feel good. Bungie was still at it. They hadn't lost their magic touch. Destiny 2 was just as good as their other games, if not better than Destiny 1. That feel when you get to the tower for the first time in Destiny 2 and you see the Traveler, oof, nothing quite like it. Then, all of a sudden, this big ass dude called Gaul appears, defeats everybody and captures the Traveler. I know we were late for the party for the Red War, but you're absolutely correct in thinking that we most definitely lost our shizmanit. We had to make up for lost time. We consumed the base game content. We devoured every inch of the game. We were Guardians once more, and every shot counted. So of course we quickly depleted the base game, which had a campaign of its own, the explorable open world and public events and patrols, but also the strikes were back and the Crucible 2, but also Gambit, which was a PvPvE arena that we could enjoy. There were new raids, new planets, bounties galore. It was awesome and it was great being back. But once we were done with all that, in a matter of weeks, because of a healthy amount of addiction, we wanted more. And we realized there were already 2 smaller DLCs and 1 bigger expansion, the Forsaken, already out. And I realized the situation felt very similar to when we quit Destiny 1. And in retrospect, I think that really was the case. But because we were given the base game only after the big DLC was already out, we didn't know if any of the previous content was barred behind the price of the Neo DLC. Knowing Bungie, it probably was, but there was no way for us to know. Just like with Destiny 1, only those affected by it probably would have known, but their voices were probably lost in the roar and cheers that Activision got for Destiny 2 and Forsaken. So yeah, we kinda forgave, or more like we forgot how much Bungie had hurt us, because it just felt so good to be back on the saddle. So we bought the first 2 DLCs, Curse of Osiris and Warmind. Like Relapse Junkies, we were here for all of it, because as short as they were, it still gave us more story, more loot, new locations, new activities, and bro, it kept us going. Then we got Forsaken despite the price tag of $39.99, just like the Taken King, because we all saw the trailer with Cade. We had to know. And don't act like you weren't itching to know, we all were. Plus, they gave us the base game for free and we spent too many hours here, so it kinda felt like we owed them. And I'll admit, here and now, I don't regret it. Forsaken was some of the coolest, funniest, and awesomest shizmanit I had played in a long ass time. It really were. The game we had played to fill that void that Destiny 1 had left could not compare. The Division 1 can suck my cranberries. I mean, I had fun with it, but it didn't nearly get me engaged as either of the Destiny games did. The gunplay also felt subpar at best. Dying Light 1, it was fun for a while, but also too repetitive. I even forget what other games I played in those 2 to 3 years that we were boycotting Bungie. That's how much those games didn't compare to Destiny, okay? Had there been an amazingly awesome game during that time, who knows, maybe we wouldn't have relapsed, but there we were. Shooting aliens like nobody's business, getting revenge for Cade, cause that's what Guardians do, am I right? And everything felt perfect again. We even made the guild, met a bunch of cool people, went raids back to back in the weekends, and those memories we made back then during Forsaken, while we tried to figure out how to beat Riven, the first time we heard about cheesing her, trying Spire of the Stars for the first time and getting frustrated to no end while we were all up at 5 AM because we had gotten to the last boss but we just couldn't beat him. The whole clan going Crucible to try and get Luna's Howl and eventually the Not Forgotten, helping new guild members with our mad jumping skills to get Whisper of the Worm. These are all memories I will most likely treasure till the day that I die. Things were going perfect. Then, January 2019 came, and Bungie announced that it was ending its partnership with Activision Blizzard, that they would be publishing Destiny on their own. It felt like Bungie splitting from Microsoft all over again, but this time, they got to keep their baby. And hell, Bungie had done a great job post-split with Microsoft with Halo 3 ODST and Halo Reach, right? We know they didn't disappoint with Destiny 1 and Destiny 2, right? It was probably nothing to worry about. They announced Shadowkeep, the next expansion that was going to take us back to the moon, #excited, and then they announced Seasons on top of expansions, and that kinda worried a few of us. Sure, a lot of games do that now, but back in 2019, it wasn't really heard of. It was either one or the other, not both. But Bungie said they were financially limited, and that they needed help to bring the best content to the players, so we felt justified. After all, this was Bungie we were talking about. So many of us did end up buying Shadowkeep at $34.99 US, and though the price was slightly cheaper than Forsaken, so was the content. It felt significantly shorter and worse than Forsaken. They told us more was to come with the seasons. At least that was their explanation back then, that the expansion felt lackluster because they were separate into seasons, so that we could play the game longer and give them more time to work on the next updates. Shadowkeep came out in October 1st, 2019, along with Seasons of the Undying, but so did New Light on that same day. New Light was a new tutorial for the game which made the game free to play for all the newcomers, which was great to increase its then current player base because after all, up until that point, most of the things you did hear about the game were positive. Anyway, if you only bought Shadowkeep at $34.99, then you got Season of the Undying with it, but had to buy the subsequent seasons for $10 each. If you bought Shadowkeep, the deluxe edition, for $59.99, then you got all of the season passes. Seeing as there were 4 seasons in Shadowkeep, Season of the Undying, of Dawn, of the Worthy, and of Arrivals, the deluxe edition was definitely more worth it on the long run. But people didn't know the details back then. Many people simply bought the standard edition, either out of ignorance or because they didn't want to spend so much money from the beginning. After all, $59.99 was the full price of a brand new AAA game. The seasons back then honestly felt repetitive. It was a bit of a disappointment. A lot of the players were willing to give Bungie a break though. After all, they were now publishing Destiny 2 on their own, without the deep pockets of Activision Blizzard. I myself, however, quit again at around the Season of the Worthy, not because I had anything against the game and Bungie, but that was around the time that I had quit my day job without having anything aligned yet. And so I had no more disposable income, and so, because I couldn't keep paying for DLCs and seasons, I stopped. But the 2.5 seasons that I did play did feel lacking and didn't make me terribly excited to come back to Destiny unless something really changed. And boy, something really did change. November 10, 2020 came out with the launch of the next big expansion for Destiny 2, Beyond Light, and with it, all the changes. In the name of having space for future content, Bungie decided to start vaulting content. But what does that mean? It meant we couldn't go to certain planets anymore. Many locations and campaign missions from the first 2 years of Destiny were gone, though Bungie did promise that they would cycle some of this content as time went on. This was done to decrease the file size of Destiny 2 and to keep things fresh. Not only so, but they made most of the equipment that you got prior to Beyond Light to have a power cap that you couldn't improve past anymore, basically making everything you grinded and farmed for useless. To a certain point, I understand why they did this. There were too many tryhards, myself included, that got all of the then called pinnacle weapons that were better than most weapons you could get back then, rivaling even some of the exotic weapons, but still being a legendary so you could equip them with other pinnacles and exotics. These weapons did definitely give the players an advantage over those who didn't have them, but the players who had them were also the ones that did put in the time and effort to acquire these weapons. So though I understand why they did this, I don't agree with how they did it. They practically threw their hardest playing fans' efforts down the drain. Starting with Beyond Light, you couldn't tell the difference anymore from who had started playing just then to someone who had been playing since the base game. Beyond Light also had 4 seasons, but the standard edition was now back to $39.99, the same price of Forsaken. But there was a deluxe edition that was now $69.99, so there was a price increase, but we had lost practically everything that came before. But hey, Bungie was doing their best without the deep pockets of Activision Blizzard, right? Then, October 2021 came around. and they had to delay the launch of the next expansion, The Witch Queen, which ended up coming out in February 2022. And despite the delay, this one seemed like it was going the right direction. It added a very interesting story to the game with a crazy twist. They also added a new dungeon and even revamped the old King's Fall raid from Destiny 1's Taken King. But not only that, they did end up vaulting some more stuff, including Year 3 stuff. But they did end up adding a weapon crafting system as a sort of an answer to everyone who were complaining about losing their best weapons to the sunset. With this new system called Deep Sight, you could craft specific weapons which you got enough Deep Sight engrams for, and craft them with the perks you liked, essentially being able to always have a God Roll weapon as long as you played enough with said weapon to level it up and unlock all the perks it had to offer. They also added a new weapon type, the Glaive, which is the first new weapon type that we got in forever. So that felt quite exciting. The standard edition of the Witch Queen was $39.99 US at the time of the release, so no increase there, but the deluxe edition, it was now $79.99. That's another $10 increase from the last time. The deluxe edition did give us an exotic SMG and an exotic Sparrow, all the season passes for year 5, but also access to 2 new endgame dungeons. And this is where we started to see more of what's wrong with Bungie. No longer was a standard edition of the expansions just standard editions. You have to remember, the standard editions, they were now the same price that Forsaken used to be. But now, instead of standard expansions, they felt more like incomplete tryout versions, paid demos if you will. Because aren't dungeons supposed to be a part of the expansion? Why is that paid separately? The deluxe edition didn't feel deluxe because you didn't get much more with it. What you got from it were all the stuff that were supposed to be in the expansion as a whole. So what they call deluxe should be the standard, and what they call standard should be a tryout version. Because after the first season is done, what can you do with the standard edition of the expansion? Absolutely nothing. There's nothing different from you and free players, aside from the ability to play the seasonal activity of that first season, which, by the way, it's usually really repetitive. Every week you do the same activity over and over to get one cutscene per week, and then just wait until the next week comes around. Eventually, I did play through Witch Queen when a friend of mine got it for me, and as enjoyable as that was, I have to admit, I couldn't help but compare it to Forsaken. We could experience the full expansion that was Forsaken for $40. But now, to fully experience the new expansion, it was double that. Did it have double the content though? And you might be saying, well, it's a whole year's worth of content, bro. But is it? Like I said, seasonal contents are glorified filler episodes in any given anime, with the short weekly cutscenes being the only thing moving the story forward. We keep doing the exact same activity over and over for a 2-minute cutscene per week. But also, when the next expansion comes, all of those seasonal activities, they're gone. You can't do them anymore. So was it really worth $80? What are we paying for here? For our own time? Nerdbucket, you said it yourself, we're paying to support Bungie so they can bring more banger content, because now they're publishing the game on their own. Okay, but July 2022 comes around. Sony acquires Bungie for approximately $3.7 billion. Was that good news? Was that bad news? Who knows? But Bungie gets to remain a multi-platform studio and publisher. So, leaning more towards good, right? They get to stay as they were, but with Sony's deeper pockets for backup, supposedly. So bring on the next expansion, right? February 2023 comes around, Lightfall comes out, Standard Edition is now $49.99, that's a $10 increase from last time, and the Deluxe Edition is $99.99, that's a whopping $20 increase. And to think the very first DLCs on Destiny 2 used to be $20 themselves. So now, the Standard Edition, which we have established previously that are tryout versions of the expansion, are now almost the full price of a new AAA game. They are $50 a pop. And the Deluxe Edition, or the full version of the expansion, is now significantly more expensive than a brand new AAA game, by quite a bit, $100 for an expansion. Not only that, but if you are going to buy the season separately along with the Standard Edition, each season is now $12 instead of $10. And one might think, that's just $2 increase, dude, calm down. But guess what? Seasons cannot be purchased directly with your dollar. You have to buy silver, the premium in-game currency, in order to get the season pass with silver. And here's the kicker. There is a $10 silver bundle, but there's no $12 silver bundle. The one bundle above the $10 one is the $15 one. And sure, you get to keep the extra silver that you don't spend, so that eventually, the more seasons you buy, the more you will have left. So eventually you get the season with what you have left, But the point is, on that one purchase, on that one go for a season, you're not spending $12 like they're insinuating. You are spending $15. Now, was that an oversight on Bungie's part for not adding a $12 bundle? Did they really just mean for you to spend $12? Maybe. But countless people have commented on this and made videos on that specific issue. And at the time of this recording, December 2023, we still don't have a $12 bundle. And with the way things are going, I think it's more likely that Bungie will make $15 season passes instead of making a $12 silver bundle. So why the price increase? It's not a small percentage either. Some say it's the trend in the industry to address inflation and rising production costs. But we have already been seeing little increases here and there since before that, right? And we were okay with it, but only because we wanted to support Bungie in their time of being a solo publisher with no backup from bigger companies, right? Didn't Sony buy Bungie? Is Sony expecting Destiny 2 to make up for the $3.7 billion that quickly? Maybe. Or did they see the financial results of Destiny 2 in the previous 2 years that Bungie was solo and they expect even more performance now? Could be. These are all just speculations, of course. But the fact is, whatever decision was made, that was kept from the players. The same players that chose to support Bungie when they were solo. When Bungie said they needed some money to bring better content for us. And now the same players are expected to dish out even more money for reasons that no one told us about. So is Lightfall a better content than the previous expansions? After all, they did say they needed money for better content, and we did dish out more money. So, is Lightfall a better content? Maybe, maybe not, who's to say? They did add a new element, the Strand. An old raid was brought back, new seasonal area, more red bordered weapons, more dungeons you have to pay for if you didn't get the deluxe. So the trend was much the same, but the reviews were worse. Players are finally starting to be unhappy with the state of things. People are saying this is a step down from the Witch Queen, while monetization is getting much worse. So did players not return to Destiny during Lightfall? Well, a lot of players did come back at one point, but not because Lightfall was so great. For about a week or so in September 2023, something that is now referred to as the Craftening happened, in which a glitch with the craftable weapons allowed one to put frames of one type of weapon to a completely different type of weapon. So people could have aggressive shotgun frames onto grenade launchers, making it shoot like 12 grenades with each shot, or the same frame on auto rifles, or even snipers, making each shot shoot that many bullets. It made each guardian into gods. I assume that glitch was around for a while, but the people who knew about it kept it under wraps pretty good. But it got full blown during that 1 week in September and everyone was using it. Grandmaster difficulty? No problem. Crota? No problem. All of a sudden, everyone could finish an activity in any difficulty, and that made the game extremely fun. At least for PvE, because PvP was quite the shit show. Bungie even announced that they were working on a fix, but that we could use it in the meantime, and that they wouldn't ban anyone because practically everyone was using it. There was a huge flow of players back in Destiny, wanting to have fun or just to check out what this glitch was all about. I've seen people on Destiny that week that I hadn't seen since Forsaken. Old friends and new, it was a grand old time. But then, after they fixed it, Bungie went on Twitter to say that the final shape expansion that was still to come was not going to be Destiny 2's last expansion, which is an interesting thing to clarify, right after the biggest influx of players in the past few years, especially if you take into consideration that the way they worded the post during the teaser trailer of the final shape back in May was something along the lines of "witness the climatic conclusion of this saga." Needless to say, a lot of players, if not most players, presumed the final shape was going to be the very end of Destiny 2's storyline. Some were glad that they were finally going to be able to see how the story ends, because let's be honest, most older players just stuck around because they had already invested too much of their time and money, and they just wanted to stay to see how it all unravels. Others, of course, were sad that Destiny was coming to an end. But to wait from May until September to clarify that final shape wasn't going to be the end, just the end of a specific saga, and right after the biggest influx of players in a long time, one can't help but wonder if they simply changed their minds because they realized they could still milk this game for longer than they had originally anticipated. Of course, that is again just speculation, but it is, at the very least, not a very good timing that they chose to announce that. It is important to note that in this whole time, I haven't even mentioned the cash shop, which aside from buying the dungeon keys on there, was just for cosmetic stuff, so no biggie. Or at least, it was, For just a few hours in November, Bungie put out a bundle which cost silver that had exotic weapons in it. Now these were weapons attainable in-game, so really, most veterans already had them. But it was the principle of it. Especially with exotic quests being vaulted, the only way you could get these weapons were through RNG in various activities, usually Crucible, Strike, or Gambit. So one could get this just after their first try of these activities, or spend months without ever seeing them. Paying for that bundle? Skip the grind, no longer leaving it to chance, and by definition, that made this bundle pay to win. The community was not happy at all with it, and Bungie took the bundle down fairly quickly. No harm, no foul, right? Right? Taking down the bundle didn't change the fact that someone at Bungie came up with the idea for the bundle and that someone else greenlit that bundle to go on sale. It was apparent that at least part of Bungie was okay with the idea of pay to win, as long as they got the money for it. Which then brings the question, how many of their previous decisions was done with the same mentality? The raising prices of, well, practically everything, multiple times? There not being a $12 silver bundle? The vaulting, which ended up making those exotics be RNG only? Perhaps even the craftening? And how far back does it go? Leaving Activision? Giving us Destiny 2 for free? Taking part of my fluffing couch because I didn't buy the fluffing ottoman? Leaving Microsoft? Whoa. Let's take a step back from this real tinfoil hat moment and just look at the facts and ask the main question we were supposed to answer before I went on this unending history lesson and rant. Is Destiny 2 worth it? That was the question, right? Or rather, is Destiny 2 still worth it? Because it definitely was worth it before, back in Forsaken. This question for other games, it would really depend on whether you are a new player or not. Because with every online game, veterans are out of content to play while new players still have a ton of content ahead of them, making it almost always worth it for new players as long as the game wasn't complete trash. In this case, however, in this specific case, perhaps the only case out there, it's the other way around. If you are a new player at the state of the game right now, there is no way I can recommend Destiny 2, especially if you want to stay free to play. There's no campaign mission you can play. That alone wrecks the Destiny experience right now. Vaulting the Red War content was a definite mistake. How can I ask my friends to start playing Destiny 2 when I know they will have a 4-minute tutorial that looks really scruffed and know that they will only be left with normal strikes, Crucible, and Gambit, with a little bit of sprinkles from Dares of Destiny for them to repeatedly play to grind out some gear in hopes of eventually being strong enough to do the free dungeons and raids? What sane person would grind those out on their own, day in and day out, without an actual story campaign for them to grow to like certain characters and places and get used to the weapon types and PvE enemies and places? Why would anyone new decide to pay for an expansion after trying this bare bones free to play? Destiny 2 isn't free to play, not anymore, it ain't. Destiny 2 is free to try and pay to play. So no, if you are a free to play new player, it definitely is not worth it, not now. Had Bungie not vaulted Red War campaign at the very least, the answer would probably have been different. What if you're a new player willing to buy the expansions? Well, have you taken a look at the stuff you need to buy, at all the expansions? And if you do buy the Legacy Collection to get everything up to Witch Queen, you would still need to get the dungeon keys for those separately. And then Lightfall plus dungeon keys, because at this point, I don't think Deluxe is worth it since we are in the last season of Lightfall. And then Final Shape Deluxe, it's honestly a lot of money, enough to buy multiple brand new AAA games. So which is better? Well, are there any AAA games that is better right now? That of course is a matter of opinion and you will have to look into that yourself. But as someone who doesn't have a lot of disposable income, I don't think getting into Destiny 2 right now, if you don't have any of the previous expansions, is worth it. It's just a lot of money for very little value because as I mentioned, all of the seasonal activities from those previous expansions are gone. You can't do them again. That alone cuts down the content of each expansion by a ton. So, who is this game for? Just the veterans who have invested a ton of money and time into this already, that just want to see how the game ends? You know, before September, I probably would have said yes. I myself wanted to see how all this ends. But after hearing that the final shape was not going to be the end, and just every season being around 2 extremely similar activities that you grind out repeatedly in order to get a 2-minute cutscene every week for $100, I don't think I can with a clean conscience tell anyone that they should do that. It makes me look back and wonder what happened. Where did it all go wrong? Bungie used to be my hero studio, my favorite by far. And now, it's difficult for me to like them. And I think part of what happened is actually our fault, the veteran players. To a certain extent, I think we enabled them. They kept slowly but surely inching their way towards a more aggressive kind of monetization, while their quality and content kept going down. We showed them that we would still continue to buy whatever they put out there, even if we did complain a little. And as much as I hate to admit it, that was part, even if just a little, of the problem. And at this moment, we don't know how far Bungie is willing to go, or how long they're willing to keep this up. We were told Final Shape isn't the end, but then what is? Where does it end? How many deluxes do we have to buy? It's an unending addiction, an unending toxic relationship we had gotten ourselves into. And if Bungie was a person, then hey, we could at least try to find a middle ground and maybe even get married eventually and have little versions of us running around the house that we get in a quiet neighborhood where we live out the rest of our lives. But that's not reality. Bungie's a company that wants to maximize profit and have their own projections to fulfill to their new lord and master Sony. And we are just nerds who want to feel that exhilaration of playing an amazing game once again. Our objectives do not match. So despite Destiny 2 still being one of the games, if not the game with the best gunplay that I have ever played, the dungeons and raids being phenomenal for an FPS, and the game in general being very beautiful to look at despite it being 6 years old already, it is with a heavy heart that I must say, it's not worth it. At least not in the current state of things, without any huge changes needing to be made. And to be honest, that kills me a little inside. Because in Destiny 2 we were guardians, immortal warriors who defied gods to save humanity. And it was in this universe of Destiny, above all other game universes, that I had sincerely wanted to always nerd on.